So I won't hit you with too many slides. We'll get straight into the scenarios. But I thought just to give you a little bit of context. First, so yeah, Dave Waters, the Truey's natural capital lead. Been with Truey a couple of years. Prior to that, I ran the Paddock to Reef modelling program with Rob Ellis, who works with us as well for the reef catchments in Queensland. So I know a little bit about NRM world, and water quality, I guess, has been my game for a long time. And thanks for joining us today. And so this follows up the webinar that Nick ran last week, where we launched Natural Capital Region. So we thought it was a good follow on then to show people a little bit more detail around building and running scenarios. So before I get into an example, just wanted to give you a little bit of context. So yeah, our bigger game is about streamlining investment into nature. For those of you who weren't around last week or some of the previous talks, so we're developing a series of apps around natural capital. So today we're just going to focus on regional scale portfolio development. So where you want to do things at a regional scale and prioritize and plan your future projects, or look at historic ones. Project is down at the on farm, the polygon on a farm scale. You drill down there. Once you decide where you're going to invest, you actually need to then come up with a series of projects. Natural capital account is whole farm account, natural capital accounting, and market is then taking that stuff through to market. We're not going to talk about that today. So that just gives you a bit of context. And in terms of the release of these products, Natural Capital Region, as I said, was launched last week. The next one will be Project and Natural Capital Impact, where you can undertake public reporting of the outcomes of your projects. That's coming soon. And then next year we'll get into account and market. So Natural Capital Region, important thing for us. So this has been an ongoing process for about 2 years to get this to the launch stage. But for us, it was pretty important to ensure that this app, worked everywhere in Australia. So how we did that was to develop instances of Natural Capital Region for different NRM areas within Australia. So we've pretty well developed probably about 20 instances now. Most of Queensland is covered now. We developed one for Southwest NRM in Western Australia. For all of Tasmania, you'll see one on the coast there of New South Wales, North Coast. And we're soon to look at something in South Australia, just so we can test it and ensure that it works everywhere. And to give you an example, our world in the reef catchments is around sediment and dissolved nitrogen. When we talk to the Western Australians, and probably to some extent in Victoria, it's all about dissolved phosphorus game. That's the important thing to them. And obviously, other measures as well. But it's more of a dissolved phosphorus game is the point. So we ensured this tool was able to work everywhere, and we're pretty confident that it does that now. So last slide. One question I get fairly regularly is, well, how is Natural Capital Region being applied to date? And what's the value? As a CEO, you need to ask this question. It's a fair question too. How's it delivering value to me? So from what we found, and this is sort of far beyond what we initially thought it would be used for, there's probably 4 areas where the app's being used. So the first one, which is really important, and that'll be the first example I'll give you, is to evaluate historic projects. So look retrospectively at what you've already funded and let that inform future investment. So you can sort of refine what you do and where you do it. And so you can make smarter decisions for your future investment or for project bids. The second one is to strengthen proposals. So you might have written a document and said, I believe this is going to have a high biodiversity outcome, but this allows you then to have data-driven justification for that proposal. And it's only one line of evidence, of course. It's not the only one, but this will give more weight to your proposal. And I'll give an example of that as well. The third one is about, at a larger scale, developing ready-to-use project portfolios which are tailored to investors' priorities. And so what I mean by this is that the app allows you to look at a range of activities that you might invest in. So it could be soft and hard engineering versus nature-based solutions. And then you can look at the outcomes or the co-benefits of those activities and pitch that to the goals or priorities of people that may want to invest with you. So, for example, in North Queensland, the tourism industry are interested in the economic and social aspect of investment, and also there's a water quality outcome. Whereas a local government council might be less interested in that. They might be interested in, working with First Nations people and looking at biodiversity and First Nations outcomes. So for the first time, the reef catchments, is what they're saying, is it actually allows opportunities for external investment into projects that they undertake. And they have options now for what they invest in. Traditionally, it would have been the options that the reef catchments had available were dissolved nitrogen projects on farm. And a lot of people weren't interested in those outcomes. They wanted other outcomes. So this has given them opportunity there. The other one is just simplifying routine reporting processes. So ensuring you've got quantifiable, measurable, outcome-focused reporting. And one quote was that it was saving in the order of 20 hours per quarter per report. So if you have to report, 20 projects, I guess that's sort of 200 hours. And I think that's important that I set that context. And that's the sort of obvious questions that a CEO asks, well, what's the value proposition for this? So that's it, no more slides. What we might do now, I'll jump to a scenario. So let's go. Okay, so sorry, the first one. So this is an instance of natural capital region for the reef catchments area of Queensland, or sorry, Mackay Whitsunday area in Queensland. So this is what we call a condition page. And for this, the base initial condition page, so everyone can see that. You can see the natural capital region. That's all good. Okay. This condition page is really useful for discussion around where you think hotspots might be. And so we have 20 underlying indicators down the side here, you can see. And they're the sort of things that we care about in terms of natural resource management. So let's sort of drill down. You can see the indicators here. And let's say we want to have a look at, where's my water quality hotspot? So you might sort of look at individual indicators, but then you might say, well, hang on, what do things look like if I overlay biodiversity and water quality? So where are the hotspots as well? So you're looking for opportunities where you might be able to do work. And, then you can sort of drill down on individual spatial units and look at the numbers that sit around that. So for us, that's, if you like, it's your natural capital account. So we intersect different layers and we've come up with a natural capital account, if you like. But for us, so that's the starting point, we believe. So, that's important, but ultimately to us, really, it's about capturing and sort of exploring where we want to do things. What are the outcomes that we can achieve by undertaking activities on this landscape? And so that's where we develop what we call action libraries. So we have both positive and negative action libraries. I'll touch a little bit of that, but in a future webinar, we will cover off on development of action libraries. So I won't go into that too much today, but for example, here's a positive action library, and it just lists the series of actions or activities that you can undertake. And these are around sugarcane land management, in this case, gully and stream, re-veg grazing, there's some urban activities, wetlands. So this is a generic library, if you like, that I've developed nationally. But then obviously if you use natural capital region, you tailor it to your own specific needs and activities. So that's around costs and efficacies and confidence, etc. So for today's exercise, we'll use this one. And important to note that these libraries, so Todd's given me permission to go into the reef catchments library. So this is all locked down and confidential for reef catchments, but Todd's been kind enough to give me access to the reef catchments library. But as you can see there's other groups that use this library. We have TRUI and we have different groups there, but I won't go into that today. But important to note that your data is secure and no one else outside of your organisation needs to see it. And we have a master library which you own and lock down. So yeah, so under this, well, let's go back and look at the re-veg activities. So there's a bunch of activities here. They have a series of attributes around each of these activities: efficacy, what area of the catchment you want to undertake these actions. There's costs, and you can put some confidence around these actions and the level of adoption you think might occur for this activity. And what are the things we care about? Okay, so acknowledging that in this particular example today, it's predominantly around water quality, but I'll show you a second example where it's purely around a biodiversity outcome, and you can weight each of those activities. So that's the library. So you have a condition page, we develop a series of actions, and then we want to implement. So that's through a scenario. So what we might do is I'll actually just start some scenarios from scratch for you to show you how easy it is. So I thought, now, again, Reef Catchments have given me permission to look at retrospectively at some of the projects that they've funded over the last 5 years. Some of these figures I've sort of made up because, you know, that's sensitive information. But let's say we're going to do a reef catchments scenario for $2 million. And then obviously you put contextual information here. You can attach in your report or project reports in here. And that's really important from my perspective that we capture some of that historical information for other people that might use the document. So, sorry, use the natural capital region for the instance. So let's, as I said, we pick a budget. We can perform all actions, or we can meet a target. And I'll run something like for that a little bit later. So they had a $2 million budget. We won't worry about the adoption level at the moment. So in this case, they did it in the Pioneer and the Prosy, okay? So you can specify spatially where you do action. So you may only pick one sub-catchment. In this case, these projects were funded in these 4 areas, the different activities. We're going to use a positive action library I'm going to use here as a suite of activities. However, for these historic projects, it was all about preservation. There was some revegetation projects. Yeah, so, and we've come up with a list of about 8 activities that they undertook. The ethnobotany one is not relevant to this exercise. So you can see we've got a series of 8 actions that were undertaken. You can see there's some soft and hard engineering actions here, and some other nature-based solutions. We won't go into negative actions at the moment. And then obviously you can weight the things that you care about. In this case, it's a water quality game, so they only care about the water quality outcomes of this project. So let's run that. Okay, and you can see we get some outcomes for each of those, and you can drill down to individual captions and look at the, for example, what was the water quality outcome for those activities in this catchment. So we're up at 0.2% for dissolved phosphorus, fine sediment, sorry. So we got some improvement in water quality there for fine sediment. This is your cumulative cost breakdown. So each of those activities, we put an upfront and ongoing cost for these activities. So you can see in that particular catchment, we've spent nearly $1 million. But if we say overall for the region, did we spend our $2 million? Yes, we did. So this is at the whole of region level, and this is what's called a cost abatement curve. So each of these dots represents another activity that was funded. So you can obviously see here that we've implemented 3 of those activities, and we've spent $1 million. And the good thing is that as you continue to spend money, your improvement increased. That's not always the case. So here you can see a list of the activities that were undertaken. There's some engineering works there, as well as the passive revegetation, and we get a series of outcomes for those. Now, you may have noted back here, but I actually assumed that everyone will turn up on day 1. So in terms of adoption, it was 100% adoption. Let's go back and yep. So let's copy that scenario. And what I'm going to do here is we'll still keep it as a $2 million investment, but let's be realistic and let's say that we've got realistic adoption rates. So everyone's not going to turn up on day 1. We're still going to spend our $2 million, and let's run that so you can see how quickly we ran that. And you can see there's a different response here, but it'll be the easiest thing will be here to do is to compare that to the other scenario which you previously ran. So as you can see, because we got much slower rates of adoption, your improvement in things like water quality. Sorry, apologies. I didn't label the scenario so properly. So let's have a look at the apologies. So that's realistic adoption. Yep. It's a good lesson for you all. Make sure you document everything. Right, let's run that again. And we'll compare that to the original scenario. So that was 100% adoption on day one. And here you can see with realistic adoption, much lower outcomes because of the rate of adoption. That you just basically run out of cheap things to do. And we can look at we've still spent the money. Now, here's a good example here of where you could use this cost abatement curve. So in this example, you can see for something like, so that's biodiversity. Let's have a look at water quality. So you can see from these series of actions, once we spend about $500,000, you're not getting much improvement in water quality and biodiversity. So you might then start thinking about investing in other things, that these activities mightn't give you the best return on investment. So that's how you can use this information to inform the things you might invest in, and you can see how you can play around with a bunch of scenarios or turn off certain activities and really hone in on getting smarter outcomes. And there's a list of the actions that were funded, and you can compare them both. And you can see we've got a lot more done with the realistic adoption, but you're covering a lot of you've got the hard engineering works, we've got some more passive fencing, but you've got a bit more variety. But obviously your rate of adoption is a lot slower, so people don't turn up on day one. Were there any questions? Okay, so what we might do now, I'll just run in a scenario. So another example would be that we'll copy that scenario. Whoops, sorry. So we'll copy that scenario. And what we'll say is we've got an unlimited budget, okay?
I had a quick question, Dave.
Yeah, sure.
Carla from Southwest NRM, and
Yep.
just with regards to how calculating, it's not, like upfront relevant to this presentation, but about how you calculate those costs and, are they based on a sort of generic formula or specific to the costs of labour and
Great question.
in each region?
Great question. So those numbers come from you, okay? So we provide this generic library that I've developed here, and there's somewhere between about 40 and 60 actions nationally. But that's the key part of this exercise, this activity, is that the whole natural capital region development, we want to build internal capacity. We don't want you coming back to us and saying, well, can you run another scenario for us? This is about building internal capacity, and you guys drive this. Where you provide your own actions, you come up with some efficacy numbers, and you put confidence around each of those activities. But the key thing is that it comes from you. Sure, we can help you, and I suppose that's sort of, we're from a science background in TRUI, and we can certainly support you and provide whatever peer-reviewed published data there is to support your assumptions there. But great question, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? So rather than have a $2 million budget, let's just have a look at the top end. What's interesting about this is saying, well, how much will we actually have to spend realistically to do everything? And it's pretty insightful, really. So again, we'll stick with the same areas. Well, actually, let's just do everything everywhere. We're going to undertake the same. We'll select all activities. So let's just say we had an unlimited budget. Let's run that. So the figure's going to be big. Yep. So you can see something like water quality. We get an outcome there. We spent lots of money, okay? And here again is a cost abatement curve where you can see, well, once we sort of spent beyond 500 million, you probably weren't getting a lot of improvement. Now, what I want to do there, so the next thing I said we would look at was let's include some negative actions. So what do I mean by this? So that's around, so we have a positive and negative action library. So I've developed a negative action library, and we just put a couple of activities in there. So for example, in Queensland, they're still clearing about 1% a year, okay? In the reef world, we invest in riparian, improving riparian areas. It's a fraction of that cost. What if we could preserve some of that that cleared vegetation and then pay a farmer to retain some of it. It'd be a way more cost-effective outcome. So we've reflected that there in one of the negative activities. And another example I've included there was unfunded maintenance of conservation areas. And from our experience, it is a common complaint from CMAs and NRMs around Australia that a lot of the funding programs, they don't consider ongoing maintenance of these things to be most effective. So this is an important way to communicate the impacts of not doing any maintenance. So let's create a new scenario. We'll call it formal actions. We'll do it everywhere. So we'll pick our positive actions, but we're also going to incorporate some negative actions here. But let's run that. And we'll look at, we're looking at water quality outcomes here. So that is incorporating positive and negative actions. Now let's go back and, so you have both, and you can see here there's a response in fine sediment that we're actually getting a decline in water quality when you incorporate those negative actions. So let's go back and now say, well, what happens if we didn't include the negative actions? Positive and negative actions. Let's run that one. But this time we'll just run the positive actions. And let's compare that to the previous scenario so we can understand. Positive actions only. We're on water quality. So in this case, there's a small difference in the water quality outcome because our negative actions are quite small. But you got the idea that you can compare both with and without negative actions to communicate that to funders. The last scenario that I'd like to run is to set a target. So again, we'll look at running a show and share. So we'll set a new scenario to look at let's look at a DIN target. We'll set a DIN target of 10%. We'll set a target. We're going to choose a DIN target. We're just interested in dissolved nitrogen in this case. We'll run it everywhere. We're going to positive actions. And then if we have a look, let's look at water quality. We'll pick one of the catchments. And you can see we've got to our water quality target of 10%. In each of the sub-catchments we've just drilled down. And for that catchment, it's cost you $1 million to achieve that target. And then we list the activities that we undertake for that work. And in this case, it was the most cost-effective thing was reducing nitrogen surplus on cane farms to achieve that. Any questions? So that was all in terms of the scenarios to give you a demo of how targets work, how we compare scenarios. I have one more quick demo. Were there any other questions though? Okay, so what you've seen here in these examples is it's definitely a water quality game, but I've had permission from Desert Channels Queensland. So they cover about a quarter of Queensland, this NRM body, based out of Longreach. So yeah, about a quarter of Queensland. So the first example was looking retrospectively at some of the projects and looking at how they could use that information to hone in their future investment. This one was an example of a proposal that was submitted by Desert Channels Queensland, and this was purely about biodiversity. So there's your condition page. The scenario they ran here was, so they had a $200,000 budget. The project was about biodiversity grant available through the state government. They had 80% of the farmers on board for this project that said yep. And it was about looking in the Georgina River catchment and removing along the riparian zone, removing prickly tree. Okay. And so it was just in parts of the Georgina, it was very targeted. The activities that they were undertaking here were around prickly tree control. So there's different densities of tree. You've got high, medium, and low. But they also undertook some organic weed control, they call it. So that's sort of biocontrols of trees. And there was some mechanical intervention as well. And then they're looking at some terrestrial weed management projects as well for the prickly tree, using drones and all sorts of things. So yeah, really interesting project. But the point was they wanted to, sorry, let's go back. And I'll also make a point that under this advanced tab, you can indicate the things that you really care about. In this case, they wanted to rate any activities that had the highest biodiversity outcome as an extremely important indicator. So that's where they've weighted these things more highly than, say, water quality, for example. So if we run that example, you can see you've got a high biodiversity outcome. Let's just drill down to one of the catchments. They're including, there was some First Nations outcomes where they could potentially engage First Nations contractors to do some of this work. And so there's a whole series of activities that were undertaken through this project or potentially could be undertaken. And you can see the cost abatement curve that they were sort of then considering will say, actually, for the activities that we're thinking of, beyond $60,000, it may not be worth doing this. So that just gives you an idea of another project that was implemented and looks at something other than water quality. Okay. I think that might do me, I think.